Thank you very much. And we'll go over there first, please. Don't forget to introduce yourself.
Yes, General. Mundir Nemri from Al Hayat TV. I have two questions. About the security force, do you find more difficulty to manage the security situation? And the second question, the lower Jarga will ask maybe the Afghan government to stop collaboration with the NATO forces. Do you have comment about this request?
The second question, the lawyer Jirga of last year actually agreed, or it gave clearance for the government to make a strategic partnership agreement with the US, who of course are the majority stakeholders in this unprecedented coalition of 50 contributor nations. This was very, very important because of course the relationship between the Afghan government and the United States, I think, sets the platform for relationships with a number of nations who will be involved here beyond December 2014, continuing to assist in the development of the Afghan National Security Forces and in aspects of governance. So I think the Lawyer Jirga was an important and very positive event from the point of view of the coalition. I'm sorry, could you repeat the first question, please?
Yes, about the security forces. Do you find more difficulty to manage the security situation in Kabul exactly?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking if we're finding security more difficult in Kabul. My answer is that over the previous 7 months, the insurgency have been trying very hard to get attacks into central Kabul. 7 months ago was the last time that they managed to succeed in carrying out a complex attack here. We did have an attack, as you know, not very long ago, about a week ago. As I say, this was the first one for a long period, which is indicative, I think, of the success, in particular, of the Afghan National Directorate of Security in thwarting a number of quite serious threat streams into Kabul. Sure, the insurgents did manage to get an attack in a few days ago. The attacks, which took place in 3 main locations, were almost completely unsuccessful, and we saw the Afghan National Security Forces carry out a well-coordinated response. They isolated the areas that were occupied by insurgents. They carried out very effective clearance operations, and early the following morning the event was over and the capital returned to normality. And at the moment it is in a state of normality. The work of government and the life of the people continues as normal.
Over there, please.
General Bradshaw, my name is Jan Cordis, Europe Diplomacy and Defense. I have one question about the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed a few weeks ago between General Allen and General Wardak concerning special operations. This is an agreement that concerns only the American side, but I suppose that from the ISAF you are also conducting some special operations. So there was 2 main points. One, it is that in this memorandum, the special operations are conducted by the Afghan forces with only the support of the American side, and the other, it is that those operations have to be approved by the Afghan operational coordination group. I wanted to know what are the rules concerning the special operations from the ISAF side, because I suppose that from the British, the French are also conducting special operations. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. As you know, the majority of special operations are carried out by US forces, but there are indeed special operations carried out by ISAF special forces as well. President Karzai and the Afghan government have expressed satisfaction in the way those operations have been carried out. The majority, as perhaps you know, are Afghan accompanied. That is the vast majority, that is with Afghans accompanying them. And wherever a house is entered, of course, that is done by Afghan forces. So I think that there was general satisfaction with the way those operations were being carried out. And so there was no requirement for an immediate change.
We'll go to GeoTV first, please.
Khalid Hamid Farooqi from Geo Television, Pakistan. General, can you explain that you said last 7 months in particular, the low intensity of attack, but we know Afghanistan is always start in the spring, intensified during summer. And that was, according to our information, Taliban, this was a trailer was played in Kabul, and they will start they are coming with their film during summer. And how prepared are you? The summer attacks they will launch against the allied forces, and you said the sanctuary across the borders, from Torkham to Kabul is a quite distance. So how they cross Torkham or Jalalabad and they go all the way to Kabul, don't you think that is the central Afghanistan and Nuristan areas, the planning being done there, and they come? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your question. No, I don't think that the planning was done in Nuristan or central Afghanistan. But in response to your point about the attacks a few days ago, I don't think they realistically signal the start of something, since we know very well that over the last 7 months, as I pointed out, the insurgents have tried to get attacks into the capital almost continuously. And during that time, nearly 400 insurgents involved in efforts to get trouble into the capital have been arrested or killed, and a number of threat streams have been disrupted. So, as I say, the insurgents have tried very hard, and the vast majority of their efforts have failed. They did manage to get this attack into the capital, and as I say, it was largely ineffective.
Associated Press.
Yes, General Slobo Lekic from the Associated Press. Since you mentioned that many operations are now Afghan-led, I wonder whether you've had a chance to see today in your report by the Afghan Analysts Network think tank, which accuses NATO of misleading the public by calling operations Afghan-led, even in cases where ISAF forces are the only troops on the ground. It specifically mentioned what you mentioned earlier as well, the attacks in Kabul, saying that, in fact, Norwegian, British, Greek, and Turkish soldiers were engaged in defeating this platoon-sized attack, and that NATO air power was finally called in to finish the standoff. So, can you comment on that?
Well, yes, I can. I absolutely reject that suggestion. The operation of the other day was Afghan-led. I went myself to visit Afghan special forces in the holding area prior to their committal to the attack. And we observed them go in to those strongholds incredibly bravely and with great determination and clear them floor by floor. So I absolutely reject your suggestion. Of course, ISAF mentors work with Afghan national security forces. There's no secret about that. That is, in fact, the partnership effort that we're engaged in and will be engaged in until the end of 2014. We provide advice. We provide help in a number of areas, but the main work is done undoubtedly by the Afghans. They make the plans, they execute the operations, and they're proving to do it very, very well.
Europa Press.
Thank you so much. Ana Pisonero from the Spanish news agency Europa Press. I don't know if you can give us the latest figures on where Afghan security forces are leading which type of operations, conventional. I thought it was 40%, but I don't know if it's gone up to 60%. Also the special ops, if you can. And my second question is, if you're not worried that, allies are coming out ahead of time saying already that, for example, in the case of the French with Capisa, will be transferred earlier than expected. Also with the Australians in Uruzgan, are you not worried that, that there's a cacophony and that the principle of in together, out together, in the end will not be respected? Because when full transition is done, and in the case of these two concrete provinces will be a year earlier than the 2014, is there not a risk that that the plan of Lisbon completely flaws? Thank you.
Well, I don't think that the Lisbon plan is remotely flawed. I think that the Lisbon plan is holding very, very strongly. You mentioned the French plans for Capisa, and we'll await for clarity after their election to see exactly what their plan's going to be. But as far as the Australians are concerned, they've issued a very clear message to clarify what their Prime Minister said, which is that they will be here until December 2014 in a combat role. And indeed, we may well see them here beyond 2014. Obviously, that's a decision for them, possibly at a later stage. But there is no question of them leaving combat operations before then. As for Oruzgan province, it is due to enter the transition process at a certain stage. And as you know, by mid-2013, all provinces are planned to be in transition. So that will be the case across the country. But that is part and parcel of the plan, and we expect Afghan forces to continue to be partnered in those provinces until December 2014.
Anna, just to stress again what General Bradshaw said and what the Secretary General actually said before and during the Jumbo Ministerial last week. The announcement by the Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard is fully in line with the transition plan agreed at the Lisbon Summit in 2010. We expect that one of the areas that President Karzai will announce in the next tranche of transition will be parts of Uruzgan where the Australian forces are, and as you know, transition in any given area takes anything between 12 and 18 months depending on the security conditions on the ground. But Prime Minister Gillard has also made very clear that Australia remains committed to Afghanistan and indeed remains committed to Afghanistan not just throughout transition but also after 2014 with trainers and probably with other forms of assistance. And just to make that very clear, there was consensus around the table of the Jumbo Ministerial last week that the principle of in together, out together stays very firm. The Australians, which are very committed partners to ISAF and indeed to Afghanistan, also are very clear on that principle, and that principle was also restated when the Secretary General met the Australian Defence Minister after the ministerial last week. If we have one last question for General Bradshaw. Oh, we've got, okay, two more. One follow-up from Anna and then over to you.
Sorry, when do you expect more or less to know how many forces, combat forces, will need for 2013 for ISAF? What would be a good number for you? Because I understand that Commander Allen wants to keep as many possible on the ground. So around the 100,000 between US and the rest of the allies, would that be sufficient for 2013? Thank you.
I'm not going to answer that question, actually, for the simple reason that we will base our requirement on the conditions that we see at the time. As you know, we are pretty much set from the end of this year on a number which goes forward through the fighting season ahead through the next year. And when we come to the end of 2013, we'll make an assessment on the future requirement.
And one last question over there.
Mario Villar with FA, the Spanish news agency. With the information you have now and looking at once the transition is completed in 2014, do you think NATO will be in a position to keep only a training mission for the Afghan forces, or some combat operations will be needed after that date?
After December 2014, I think the only thing we know for sure about what is likely for the NATO mission is that we will be continuing to train leaders, build institutional depth, and advise. Now, the extent of that advisory role, I think, has still got to be worked through. But I think at this stage, we anticipate that combat operations for NATO finish in December 2014.
Indeed, we don't foresee a combat role for NATO in Afghanistan after 2014. However, as General Bradshaw has just said, we will continue to assist, to train and to advise the Afghan forces so that they remain strong and they remain capable beyond 2014, and will also ensure that our trainers have the resources that they need to do the job. The details of our commitment to Afghanistan after 2014 will of course be discussed and agreed by heads of state and government at the summit in Chicago in less than 1 month from now. But what is clear is that NATO will remain committed to Afghanistan and to supporting Afghanistan so that it remains stable and secure after 2014. With that, thank you very much indeed, General Bradshaw. Thank you very much for joining us from Kabul.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Oana. And can I just finish by saying that, in summary, we've seen the momentum of the insurgency reversed. We're now going forward arm in arm with our Afghan partners as they grow in strength and capability. As you know, the Afghan National Security Forces will be up to 1/3 strong very shortly. They are increasingly confident, capable, and they are achieving great things, shoulder to shoulder with the 50 nations of ISAF. And having just been on the ground on patrol with forces down in the south of the country earlier today, I can attest to the high morale and determination. We're going to keep relentless pressure on the enemy, and as I say, we expect to see the momentum of the insurgency continue in reverse as we go towards December 2014 and a seamless handover to our Afghan partners in December, where they fully take the responsibility for the combat role. And we've got great confidence in their ability to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And as you can see, you can pack a lot into one day in Afghanistan. Thank you.